an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Rogue, chapters 9, 10, and 11. Anticipation and betrayal, secrets shared, and a misunderstanding. In these chapters, I really hated watching this happen. I hated it so much, you guys. I hated it so much. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode. Ashleigh is here in the chat. Hi. Welcome. Yeah, I'm not going to start where I want to start because it will be easier if I just go through this all in order. But this one hurt a little bit. So let's start with chapter 9. We start off, we are in class with Lilia and Forreal and Maddie. And they're doing defensive magic. And Lilia does the sharing of magic thing through the skin. Reaching out to lay a hand on Maddie's shoulder, Lilia sought a sense of the other girl's power so that she could create an inner shield attuned to it. If it wasn't in tune, it would prevent Maddie striking. She sensed nothing. Maddie was rigid and tense. Looking up, she saw her old friend abruptly look away, avoiding her eyes. The girl's power was suddenly there, clear to her senses. Annoyed, Lilia created the inner shield. Now, what was that about? That felt like that was some homophobic shit, and I don't know if that's my imagination. But why did she hide herself that way? That's what, I don't know, that feels like something shifted with them as friends, and I feel bad about it. And they're complaining about how they are not particularly good at this. Forreal especially is like, we are more of a liability than anything. And she also says that maybe the best thing would be for us to give up our power entirely anyway. Like Sania and Callan, we are meant to sort of like contribute, and maybe that is for the best. And they're talking about how, like, yeah, that's true, you'd give up your power and you'd be in the immediate future drained, but you would be able to recharge your batteries if you had a couple of hours between when you were drained and when you were attacked. And there is still going to be an opportunity, hopefully, for you to save yourself. So hopefully you're not going to just like give up because there's nobody around to protect you. That would be a real bad example to set. And Lilia is called by the teacher a good defender after she's asked if she likes warrior skills. And I think that this is a nice moment for where the teacher has given her enough of a compliment that she's feeling like, okay, I don't totally suck at this. But it's also letting her know that the teacher doesn't think she's proficient enough to consider becoming a warrior major. So now she has to decide between healing and alchemy, and she still doesn't know what she's going to pick, and she has a year and a half to do it. And Naki she has warrior skills and alchemy for hers that she's torn between. And I really liked this. She was torn between warrior skills and alchemy. She was worried she would come to regret choosing the former, though it was her favorite and best discipline, because the only useful thing she could do with it during peaceful times was teach, and she didn't think she'd be a good teacher. Yeah, that's one of those things when you are trying to get into a particular vein of scholarship. You do have to take that sort of thing into account. What kind of work will be available to me in reality? And am I well suited to that in the meantime? And that is influencing Lilia's choice. She is interested in alchemy because, well, it's partially because she thinks it's more interesting. I think there's also the potential that Naki chooses it. So she's sort of keeping that open in her mind. But she thinks that alchemy is indulgent, when if she were a healer, that would be useful. And that is also something that I really understand. The desire to do something that will be overall worthwhile versus something that's genuinely fun. And how do you quantify that, you know? And then we have Lilia remembering that Naki will be graduating ahead of her and wondering whether or not once she has graduated, she will be tired of Lilia and tired of wanting her around, when she's got school still going on. Is she going to put up with that kind of thing? And it's just another moment of reminder for Lilia of how much her life is circling around Naki already. She is just already so concerned about this, and it's years in the future. And she does have to stop herself and be like, oh, why am I worrying about this now? I don't even know if she loves me. But it's clear this is at the top of her mind regarding most topics, you know? So we go then to Lorcan, and this is a Lorcan. What are you doing? He's pushing it again a little bit, right? He's in a tunnel, and he is. It's obvious, he's thinking about how I'm not technically leaving the city, so I'm not really breaking any rules. But he's saying he hopes he hasn't. He's not even sure of that, you know? But he's fucking sneaking around. And this is just one of those things where I'm like, man, you just barely got out of this other thing, this other bullshit you pulled. You really need to bide your time a little bit. Give it a second so that they get fooled into thinking that you don't intend to do that shit again. You gotta, space all that shit out. So as he comes to the end of this passage, he hears this rushing sound, and he comes out, on this ledge, and there is a river running below. A water wheel pushed water out of a side tunnel to join the larger flow. The water was the darker color, and he realizes that's the sewer. And that, he had expected it to be really disgusting, but because it's being mixed with this fresh water, which is what's pouring into the, as a waterfall, it seems to be keeping everything from being too horrified. And when he turns around, and once he's we realize that he's in the sewers, I was like, oh, okay. He's down here to try and see Tyvara. Initially, I was just like, what, guy? Seriously? And even still, it's not a good idea. He shouldn't be doing this, but he's going to do what he's going to do. So he turns around and Tyvara is there, but so is the queen, who he was not expecting. And he knows that this maybe looks bad. And he asks if he's breaking any rules. And Zarala says, well, nobody's here to see, and we were just talking about you. And he's like, oh, were you? I hope it was good. And she's like, oh, I'm sure you do. And just kind of gives him a smile. And he's sort of like surprised to find how much he likes her, even though she sort of represents these people who are holding him hostage, essentially. So he tries to be cagey here when she's like, why are you coming to see Tyvara? And he's like, well, she gave me some good advice, you know, about something really personal. And Zarala is like, oh, you mean about how you shouldn't fuck somebody because they could kill you with it? You mean that? And he's just like, yes, that is what I mean. Like, it's a pretty fun moment of him just attempting to be all fucking, and she knows exactly what the hell is happening. And he says, my opinion of the traitors was lowered when I learned there would be no punishment for it. And she is like, dude, he went into this like willingly. He was consenting. There is no way that you can prove what that woman did to him was deliberate. And she says, and this is something that I thought he had started to piece together, but apparently not. She says maybe he knew that this was coming because we didn't punish him in another way. And he was willing to pay that price in exchange for getting to sleep with this girl. And this is our way of leveling a punishment that he deserves, and he knows it. And he was at least trying to have a good time while being punished. I mean, have you thought of that? And it's really clear Lorcan had not thought of that and is suddenly like, oh, I guess Ivar is smarter about all of this than I thought. And I'm like, I thought we had figured that out already. Ivar really seems to know what the fuck is up. Like, okay, like, catch up, Lorcan, you know? And there's a conversation about their society not being fair, but being apparently more advanced than a lot of others in terms of overall equality. And they discuss the concept of keeping themselves isolated and whether or not that is to their advantage. Tyvara says, at least we have an idea of equality. A lot of the resistance to change comes out of the knowledge that we are the only people ruled by women. If we do not isolate ourselves, we may end up like everyone else. And Zarala's like, okay, yeah, but we are also growing as a people and just running out of room, like in a purely practical sense. Keeping ourselves totally isolated forever just does not seem to be a realistic goal. And she says, if we let this detritus, she's looking at the sewers now, flow into Sachakan waterways, the Ashaki might notice and follow it back to its source. But if we grow in numbers, even the Eline rivers may not be large enough to hide our waste, and they might start to wonder where it's coming from. Which, that is not something that I had considered, but that makes a lot of sense. Like, no matter how far from things you are, if you grow big enough, there will begin to be connections between you that are completely unavoidable and not necessarily voluntary. And Tyvara tells Lorcan that there are arguments recently about, probably not just recently, but there have been arguments about having children and that, oh, excuse me, I swallowed a frog. Having children and that some people want to stop non-magicians from getting to have children at all. And the queen is like, yeah, see, that is the thing that they're saying, oh, let's not let anyone else other than magicians have children to say, stay small and under the radar because we don't want to change. But that is a change. And it will change who we are if we begin to deny certain people the right to have children, that's a major invasive decision to make. How are we arguing that we don't want to change and then making these huge judgment calls that, frankly, we don't have the right to? That feels sort of counter to the goal of what we are aiming for here. And then she says we have to face the fact change is inevitable either way. We are either going to have to adapt to new people from the outside knowing where we are and cope with that, or we are going to have to make major internal changes and face that either way, it's up to us to control the direction we change in, but not try to avoid change altogether, because that is simply impossible. We're not managing that. And Lorcan asks what changes they would make, and she's just like, yeah, I have no idea. That's something that we're trying to figure out. So Zarala gets on a little disc of air and leaves him and Tyvara to their own devices and tells Tyvara not to get too distracted. And they sit down and have a little chat. He's like, thanks for telling me not to fuck anybody. And she's like, well, I mean, you told me you weren't planning on fucking anybody. So, like, I don't know why you're being so thankful to me. If you were really not going to fuck anybody, then it wouldn't have mattered that I told you or not either way. In that kind of like roundabout way where she's just trying to like get a sense of whether or not he had been telling the truth, that he didn't want to fuck anybody else. And he's like, I won't be fucking anybody else. I have no intention of doing it unless you tell me to. And she turns and looks at him and gives him a smile, but then looks away and sort of, he just decides, all right, well, I drop a little hint there, but I'll back off now. And it turns out that she is turning the wheel down there with magic. So she has to be here to do this, which honestly is the most like, I've talked before about how few things in this universe are like magically imbued objects. And one of the things that I find the most interesting is the weird sort of like anti-gravitational staircase and balcony that are in the Magician's Guild's like hall. And I can't help but wonder if like whoever the architect was for them could come here and figure out how to make this some sort of perpetual motion machine, because what a boring job. Oh my God, what a boring job. Jesus. And he says that he can stay for a couple of hours, because Kalia is going to be making cures, and she's sort of acting like it's a combo of things. Like, you don't know how to do this. And also the recipes, I don't want you to know them. And I'm just like, Kalia, man, you really need to like get over yourself a little bit. She is tedious, Ashleigh said, right. And because they don't have healing and the birth control that comes with that, it would probably be a permanent invasive sterilization process, which, absolutely not okay to enforce on people. Like, yeah. Like any way that you just decide this whole class of people doesn't get to have children. No, regardless of whatever you do to enforce that, that is just a wrong thing to do. That's eugenics, like, no, you don't get to. But yeah, then you combine it with the fact that they don't really have any modern ways of even enforcing that in the first place. And then it becomes a genuine horror show and not just like a human rights violation. The original architect is long dead. Oh yeah, I know. I just figured that like the knowledge of how to do that had been handed down, but I don't know that that's true. Maybe it was just like somebody who was super talented knew how, and then they did it. And, if they break it, it's gone forever. So we go then to Rothan and Sania. And they are waiting to see Rothan's son and daughters and wife. And it does seem like maybe his wife is a little bit threatened by Sania. And I am deeply curious what that's about. Because Sania's like, he can't have told her. Like, that is just don't do that, guys. And I have to agree. It's one thing to sort of like to just have a basic history of the fact that you were, but there doesn't need to be detail. And if you know that one of your like old flames is going to be potentially still in your life because of general association, it's one of those like, I don't know what's worse. Do you just not tell them? Because then that feels like it's suspicious if you didn't say anything. But if he told her, I would have liked for him to have done it ages ago. But that wouldn't really explain why she seems so intimidated now. Intimidated isn't wrong. Threatened. Intimidated implies that she's genuinely afraid of Sania, and it does not feel that way. So, and there's a little chat between Sania and Rothan as they wait. And he says, or no, she says, you want your children to take it for granted that they have a better life than you. But at the same time, you hope they don't take it for granted in case they let bad things return out of ignorance, which is real talk. So a look of recognition came into Alina's eyes as she saw her husband's father, and she smiled faintly. She looked at Sania again, and a line between her eyebrows deepened. Her gaze dropped to Sania's robes, and she schooled her expression into a serious one. I'm wondering if Sania is maybe like super hot still. Maybe she's like aware that Dorian and her used to be a thing like way back, and it wasn't bothering her until she looked at Sania and then was like, oh shit, this bitch looks good. I don't like that. You know, maybe she's like newly threatened. The eldest of his daughters, Lilia, emerged first. She favored her mother in looks. Yelara, the younger, ignored her father's offered hand and jumped down the steps nimbly. Sania was amused to find that Alina said nothing in response to her greeting, then busied herself checking that her daughters were presentable. Once satisfied, she took Dorian's arm and looked at Sania with an expression that was almost defiant. And Sania initially is just like, oh, she must not like me because I'm a black magician, and then finally realizes the obvious thing. So they get interrupted here. Let's see. Ashleigh says, could also just be she's not a magician and is just jealous she can't share that with her husband while Sania is so influential. Oh, I didn't know she wasn't a magician. I assumed that she was, but they are required to attend the academy. So if she had been, they would have met. I forget that that's like a requirement. I'm thinking about this in the way that there's other magical schools that she might have gone. Maybe she's homeschooled, but that's not how that works here. So, okay. Yeah, I could see that. And also Sania has like this fucking close to legendary history at this point. And it is, it has to be really intimidating when you are somebody that is just an ordinary person competing with someone who's essentially like a national hero, kind of. So yeah, I could see that getting to you. So Sania gets interrupted here with a note from Sari, and she winds up having to leave very abruptly. And when she says that she has to go, Dorian's like really interested. Alina is angry and worried. And I'm like, is she angry that Sania is leaving, or is she angry that Dorian's interested? I would guess the latter, because leaving, I'm sure she would have been delighted with that. And he tells her, you'd better not leave me out next time. And I was like, you better talk to your wife before you make those kinds of statements, sir, because I don't know if you're catching that whole vibe that's happening right there next to you. And she remembers back to Alina having visited the guild before. The couple of times, they didn't really make much of an impression on each other. The first time, Alina was just totally enraptured by Dorian. And then the next time she had the baby, and Sania hadn't even really spent any time with her. And then the next time, Sania was taken up with work. There were a bunch of people falling ill. So yeah, she's like, I guess I just don't really know her. And he's staying for a while. It says about 6 months. So I guess I'll spend that time trying to figure out what she's feeling and reassure her and make it clear that I am not interested in her husband and that's not a problem. So she has the encounter here. This is an interesting thing. First she has a cloak that she has to put on to cover up her magician's robes. Naki is the person who handles that for her. She says they wear their cloaks long. It only buttons up to the thigh, so the front opens up when you step. People will see your robes, but they'll assume it's a skirt. And Sania walks through Northside and gets stopped by somebody who tells her the exact directions to go in on. And this is a weird... I forgot about this because this dude is trying to... Signal is for the screen in the top right window to slide open. And then go in straight up the left-hand stairs to the 3rd floor. And he's holding out these perfumes that his wife makes. And it's a weird thing. I feel like this is going to have to factor into things somehow, but I don't know how this could be. It's like the gun. What do they call that? Chekhov's gun? It feels like Chekhov's perfume, but I don't know what this... No idea. I'm very, very curious about it. So she goes upstairs. A couple of dudes try and stop her, and she uses magic to sort of get them up out of her face. And they call out to each other to warn Sari, who apparently he's just been watch out for somebody trying to attack with magic, and they're thinking that might have been the thing. And they come outside fucking with their knives in their hands and see Sania standing there and are like, oh, Jesus. Okay. God, it's just Sania, you assholes. This moment. So let me go to chapter 10. And Ivar is shaking Lorcan and waking him up. And Lorcan is realizing that he has overslept. This is one of those things that I've always been so curious about, because being able to wake up at a certain time is a really rare skill. And I've always wondered how societies functioned when they had morning appointments and they needed to be up at a certain time. And they didn't have this technology of setting an alarm or having a clock that winds up, I've always really just, how do you manage to do it? For me, I'd have to make sure all of my appointments were after 11 a.m. because God knows what time I'm deciding to wake up that day. So Lorcan just barely showers, eats really fast. Leota came to speak to me last night, said Ivar. This is the woman that drained Ivar of all of his energy. She said she enjoyed our evening together. And Lorcan's like, uh-huh, I bet. And Ivar's like, oh, she said it was a good time. And I don't know. I don't think she was lying. Maybe if she wanted to do it again. And Lorcan's like, are you kidding me? You would not. No, tell me you wouldn't just like go walking right the fuck into that. And Ivar's like, look, I knew what might happen. He says there were going to be people who thought I should be punished for taking you to the caves. If they didn't do it that way, they'd find another. This way, I got a bit of fun out of it. And while Leota may be opportunistic, she's also got a great body. And Lorcan's like, well, fuck. I feel like a goddamn idiot. And I'm like, you should a tiny bit. Like, yeah, this dude knew. He knew. And I find it amazing. I really, really enjoy Ivar. And if she did happen to enjoy more than gaining some magic and the satisfaction of punishing me, then maybe she will come back for more, Ivar added, his gaze turning misty again. And Lorcan's like, all right, well, you know, maybe he does just want to get laid now, but I'm not even that mad at him for that. I kind of admire this whole thing because he's figuring it out. And Lorcan is in a rush to get out, and he says something about how it's getting worse. And Ivar's like, yeah, I've heard that it's grim. This happens every year. And Lorcan's like, I know that it does, and Kalia says that too, but she's also kind of fucked with me before, so I don't totally buy anything that she tells me. And Ivar's like, no, that's a valid policy, correct. Probably good to approach it that way. So as he's heading over to the hospital wing, he realizes that things are much, much quieter than they normally are. And he doesn't begin to hear voices until he gets closer to the care room, and he sees that there are a lot of people here, and they're sort of looking at him and scowling at him. And he thinks it's because Kalia has like been talking to everybody about how he's late and just sort of trashing him while he's been away. But we find out pretty quickly that there are some people here who are very ill, and he represents a person with the knowledge to save them who will maybe not cooperate. And so they are giving him that look because he's standing in the way of healing some people, and they are not impressed by it. And when he sees the first girl who's really, really sick, he realizes that she's like around 6 years old and is able to, with his senses, be able to tell that she is much sicker than she should be. What they have been seeing isn't what she has. And he is like, God damn it. I knew this was coming. I knew there was going to be a point at which I was going to have to make the choice on whether to do this. And I had already decided how I was going to handle it. But I'm not doing it right now in front of everybody. So I guess his plan is going to be, I'm going to heal these people for sure. But I'm not teaching anyone. I'm not giving the knowledge away. I will heal people. But I also want to ask Tyvara, because what if they don't let me leave? Really, really don't let me leave. What if this is just it? If I refuse to teach them and I say I will heal them, I don't know what they'll do. Now, they've already said they won't let him leave, but I feel like he's still been operating under the sort of assumption that he might get away eventually, that they would let up. And now he's being sort of faced to make this choice. He's been forced to face the real, like, consequences a little sooner than he thought. So then we go to a scene with Daniel and Tyant. And this was really interesting. And I don't really know where they stand by the end of this. It feels like they have sort of decided that they're still broken up by the end of things. Because of the way that Daniel's saying that he hopes that Tyant isn't too perceptive. That sort of, to me, sounded like Daniel being like, because I would really like to hook up with a Chadi. So I hope he isn't so perceptive that he'll be able to tell that that's happened. So Tyann comes to dinner with Daniel. And it's not like he was invited. This wasn't planned. He's just sort of like, well, I'll just dine with him, to one of the servants outside when they mention that, like, Daniel's in there eating. And this, I really admire the fact that Tyann says this to him. He says, I want to work out what the situation is here before I get anybody else involved, whether it was safe, how things work. And I think I've worked out some things. How about I tell you what I've guessed and you tell me if I'm right? So Daniel says, okay. He says, I've worked out that you and I are no longer a couple. And Daniel feels really ashamed and is like, I guess not. And Tyann's like, yeah, you put me in the guest rooms, which to me was a pretty clear sign. And he says, don't tell me it would have caused a scandal if I'd slept in your bed. The Sachakans knew all about us before you got here. I tend to agree with Daniel on this. Whether they know is a very different thing than whether they will allow you to behave that way when you are there. I don't really think being put in the guest rooms counts as, like, this is just, it's like when you are pretty young and you have a significant other that you're seeing and you're definitely sleeping with, but you're staying at your parents' house and your parents expect you to, like, not share a bed. While past a certain age, that's ridiculous and your parents need to get over it. I understand if you're still like 20 years old, you know, that your parents might be like, dude, I'm sorry, no. Y'all are too young. No. He sleeps on the couch and you can sleep in your bed, and that's how that's going to work. And I don't feel like that's totally unreasonable. That's like something that you sort of have to work up to your parents being able to be cool with that and see you that way. And the Sachakans knowing, you know, what he's up to, it's not like his host is also a lad, but he's not just out here like with a dude living in his bed with him. Like, that's, I don't know. I just felt, I got what Tyann was saying, but I do think that Daniel was in the right on that one. And that doesn't sound like just an excuse. So, but I will say that Daniel says if they had disapproved, they might have refused to deal with us. And Tyann's like, deal with us? There are no deals happening. Nobody's trying to get anything from us. We are just here as a sort of entertainment for them and a novelty, and you're here to do research. We don't have to worry about their disapproval influencing deals. So, I mean, if you think they would disapprove, that then they would like really get violent about it or something, maybe, but that's not the thing. And he says, I've also worked out that Achati is a lad and rather fancies you. I haven't quite worked out if you fancy him in return. And Daniel gets really embarrassed and says, well, he's a friend. And Tyann's like, yeah, your only friend. Nobody else seems very impressed with you. And if he's your only friend here, you are really going to have to decide what the fuck to do, because you can't just like sort of lead him on for very long. And if you turn him down, how is that going to go? What are you going to stay here in this house after like refusing him? I feel like that's not going to go super well. He says, Achati doesn't seem like the sort of man I'd want to make angry. And Daniel says, you once would have said that about me. And Tyann's response is, then I got to know you, and you're not at all scary. Sometimes you're even a little pathetic, always worried about what people think, burying yourself in your research to make yourself feel worthy. And Daniel says it's important research. And Tyann's response is, oh, yes, very important. more important than me. And this is an interesting argument they have here. Daniel says, you were also interested in this stuff at one time. But then we stopped with our adventures on the high seas, going to foreign places and checking out weird caves. And all of a sudden, being at home doing actual work was just too much to fucking ask. And you didn't want to be bothered. And Tyann says, okay, I guess I see how you think that's what happened. In my perspective, it looked like I didn't have anything more to offer. Because you were doing all of this writing, and I really felt like that was something that you were specializing in, and I wasn't as good at that part, and the Grand Library and like my access to that was what I brought to the table, and I didn't have that advantage anymore, and I didn't feel like I was a good scholar. You were the one who was good at that part. And Daniel's like, well, dude, I didn't know you felt like that. I would have been able to find something for you to stay involved if I thought you were interested at all. And Tyann was like, well, I thought you were purposely keeping everything separate from me. Like when you came to Sachaka without me, that to me confirmed everything I had been thinking. Now, I want to mention here that as interesting as I find this conversation and the sort of like the depiction that we're seeing of two people misunderstanding one another's like body language, I do want to mention that I was under the impression from the previous book that Daniel seemed to think Tyann was cheating on him. Like, there seemed to be something about the way that Tyann was behaving that had him believing Tyann was like out here acting up, going behind his back. And that doesn't come into this at all, this conversation. And I don't know if maybe Trudy Canavan wrote that in the last one and then was like, well, that's a little bit too, like, that's a little bit too unforgivable, and maybe we'll just pretend I didn't really say that. I don't know if I misunderstood or what, but I feel like if that were still a thing, Tyann would have brought it up. So it's sort of, I don't know. I'm just going to assume I misunderstood the way he was interpreting things. So let's see. Oh, Ashleigh says, I was reading about a subset of Irish society that lived on an isolated island and kind of did their own thing for a lot longer than the rest of society. They didn't track time by hours and minutes. It was literally just judging by the general position of the sun. Okay. But like, how do you make yourself wake up? Like, that's not something you're conscious. I don't think he had any actual evidence, though. It was mostly just that he spent a lot of time openly partying with other gay guys. Okay, so his thing was like he's turned into a real party guy, and I assume that fucking around on me just goes with that, which I can sort of understand making that assumption. I would have liked if he brought that up and was just like, well, I kind of figured that you had already moved on, and see the way that Tyann reacts to that. So let's see. Did you come all the way? Daniel asked Tyann, did you come all this way only to see what I was up to? And Tyann says, when you left, you made me realize I was bored. Turns out you're right. Having a purpose does make life more interesting. And he asks Tyann what he means by that. Like, okay, well then what's your purpose? And Tyann doesn't answer him. And Daniel's realizing, well, first of all, he's the first Eileen ambassador in Sachaka, which is a pretty bold move. And he has to admit to himself, like, I respect that. I admire that. And even acknowledge that really, when you look at things objectively, Tyann is better at this than him, which I've been saying. So, yeah. So then we go to Naki and Lilia. And this is the thing I really hate. Lilia, Naki, and her father, whose name is Lord Leiden, are eating dinner together. And it's one of those incredibly awkward meals in which nobody is really interested in the other person at the table. They're asking each other questions. They don't care about the answer. Like, they don't care about the answers to the questions. They're asking for the sake of like filling the silence and barely even really listening to the responses. It's just super bored. And Naki is acting really aggressively angry. It says Naki's answers to her father's questions had been shorter than usual, verging on snarly. At one point, she'd asked him about someone, and he'd winced, frowning at her disapprovingly, and changed the subject. To Lilia, however, she was overtly friendly, leaning over and patting her on the leg, winking at her or pulling faces. Lilia was relieved when the meal had finally ended. Yeah, that's weird. I really want to know what the fuck is going on here. And at this point, Naki says, well, first she starts swearing. And Lilia asks what's wrong. And Naki says, I can't tell you the details. All I can say is that he found out about a little side project I've had going on. And to punish me, he took something. No, he stole something from me. And then laments how that was her one way to make money because he doesn't give her enough of an allowance, and that he really, like, she doesn't know what she's going to do now because she doesn't have her project going. And Lilia is like remembering how every place they've gone, it's always been Naki who paid. And she feels really guilty and is like, man, I should pay for things when we go out. Like, and she says, at least let me pay for them until you find another way to earn some money. It would be nice to be able to spoil you for a while. Honestly, when she started whining about how she hasn't got a way to make money now, I immediately was like, oh, fuck. This bitch has been setting her up. I thought this was going to be some sort of weird scheme about, like, circling around money. And, you know, that's not to say that isn't the end goal here. But murder coming into it doesn't occur to me until fucking later. This, I really saw the fucking manipulation happening. And it's so sad because Lilia really is so enraptured by Naki that she can't see all of the red flags. It's a combo of things here. Naki is unusually beautiful. She's got a larger-than-life personality. She is privileged enough that she has been able to take Lilia out and lavish her with attention and with gifts and things. And all of that combined with the fact that Lilia is self-conscious about the fact that she is gay and doesn't know of anybody else who approves of this or who is like, this is the most popular person in school giving you 100% of their attention. That is a very tough thing to withstand when you aren't very sure of yourself. So Lilia is a prime target for Naki to invest her time in for her con, which is what I think this whole thing has been. I don't know. Maybe Naki was initially actually interested in Lilia, and she decided as time went on that it would be a perfect, like, Lilia would actually be the perfect patsy for this whole thing. Or it was from the start that she sort of sensed Lilia was self-conscious and uncertain of herself. And because that's the thing about predators. If Naki is a predator, which I think she is, they can tell who will be receptive to manipulation. They can tell who will take the most abuse without putting up a fight. They know. That's like, it's a terrible thing to witness them zero in on a person with complete awareness that here's one that won't be able to withstand me. And I think that might be what was going on. Let's see. Ashleigh says, this hit very close to home for me. Not the murder bit. I hope not. But being manipulated by another girl who was trying to use my attraction to her against me so that she could con money out of me. Ugh, I'm sorry. There is nothing like realizing that somebody was playing you. And I don't think I've had that happen with a guy. Like, not really. My high school boyfriend was a huge liar. But he was like one of those people who believed his own bullshit. So it wasn't even like he was trying to con me. He was trying to con himself, and I got sort of weirdly sucked into it. But yeah, this whole moment is just like, I hate it. So they kiss. Lilia is about to say that she loves her and hesitates. And Naki jumps up and it's like, let's go to the library. I have some Rowett. And Lilia has her first thought is, can't we do anything without Rowett? And I really, really liked that because I've been so worried that Lilia is going to be an addict. And like, look, she still may be. I mean, we haven't seen her go an extended period without it. So there is a possibility that once that happens, we'll realize, oh, she needs it now. But I'm hoping the fact that she's not having like cravings means that she's not actually hooked yet. We'll see. And I'm wondering if this like Rowett, I figured when I first thought about it, I was like, the Rowett's probably a factor to get Lilia's guard down so that Naki can like influence her. And then I was like, well, potentially Naki wants to keep control over Lilia. And if she gets her also hooked on this stuff, that might be a pressure point that she's created that she can use. I don't know. So they both use the Rowett, and Naki's asking, or Lilia's asking Naki about like whether her father will walk in. And Naki says he'll be asleep. He was complaining before you arrived about how it had been a long day and he was so tired. And I'm like, was he? Now that I'm rereading it, I'm like, is he already dead? I don't know. So Naki gets up and picks up the book about black magic. And she basically does this very gentle sort of manipulation that honestly I think is pretty overt manipulation, but Lilia is so like blind to it that she doesn't realize. And they read this whole section that is alleging to teach you how to use black magic, which Lilia feels isn't clear. And also, everyone says you can't learn black magic from a book. So the combination of these things, she really doesn't think this is going to work. But Naki flatters her with, I never trusted anyone else to read this or try this, and I trust you. I would do anything for you. And Lilia manages to do it. It appears that she is able to like access Naki's power without very much trial and error at all. It's like an instinctive thing, and she's really shocked at how it seemed to work. And it's just so weird, like this moment of how easy it is. So Naki tells Lilia, have some of my power. A flash of magic leapt from the break in Naki's barrier into Lilia's. At once, she understood how easy it would be to reach through and draw that energy within herself. But she didn't want or need to do it. Drawing back from Naki's presence, she opened her eyes. I think it worked, except it's too easy. I can't be doing it right. And Naki says, all right, you know what? Let me give it a shot. And she says, we do this together. And Lilia fucking eats that up and is like, okay. And she lets Naki take a bunch of her power. She felt Naki let go of her arm. And Naki said, I don't think it worked. And Lilia's like, what? I definitely felt you taking power. And Naki says, no, I couldn't sense anything. All the years I've wanted to try it, and I finally have someone to trust, and it doesn't work. And I'm like, what's this about? Why is she like acting like it didn't work? And it becomes really clear later why. So this moment is so terrible, you guys. She says, let's go to bed. And she goes and gets a bottle of wine. Naki opened the bottle and raised it to her lips. After drinking a mouthful, she grinned and handed it to Lilia. I don't know that she did have a mouthful. I feel there was something in this, and Lilia did not know it. And Naki tells her he's not my real father. He just wound up with me because mother remarried and then died. And he'll marry me off to the first person he can. She's feeling real weird and woozy. And Naki says, I wish he was dead sometimes. You said you'd do anything for me. Would you kill him if I asked? And Lilia smiles and sort of shrugs. And I was like, dude, how are you smiling right now? This bitch is amping shit up, and you really need to fucking wake up and see that that's what's happening here. And she asks herself, could I use black magic and hide it? Make it look like an accident? Naki was murmuring something, but the words were distant and took too much concentration to understand. Mind full of dark thoughts, Lilia slipped into strange and vivid dreams where she ridded Naki of all her problems, and they lived a life of love and secrets in a house full of staircases and hidden doors and cabinets filled with frustratingly cryptic books. So, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. We have Sonia. She goes to visit, what's-her-name's, the prisoner, whose power has been blocked, Lorandra. And Lorandra is making something that's like a native fabric. And Sania is sort of pressing her about it in an attempt to get her to open up and talk a little bit more. And Lorandra, when Sania asks about where she comes from, because remember, they kill people who can do magic where Lorandra's from. She asks her, if we sent you back, now that we have blocked your powers, would they leave you alone? And Lorandra's like, no, because it's in my bloodline. So whether or not I can actually access power right now, that's not the point. It's that I could, like, it's in my blood and I could teach other people. And they don't want that at all. And she says, we have no neighboring lands. The Kagar defeated them all 100 years ago. There were hundreds, most of them small, but together they make your allied lands look tiny. You had best hope they never look across the desert, or Sachaka will be the least of your worries. And I'm really wondering about that. Sania rightfully is like, well, she's saying that with a lot of authority, but she also has a very narrow understanding of how magic works because she didn't know we could read her mind forcibly. So I don't know that she's really the authority on that. But she winds up getting interrupted by this news that there has been a murder using black magic. And guys, this fucking, the way this was set up, poor Lilia. She wakes up, she's got blood on her hands. And Naki is screaming at her, how could you do it? How could you kill my father? And knowing that this girl set her up. I mean, I can't believe it hasn't occurred to Lilia yet. When Sania comes in to speak to her, she says, I love her and she hates me. She's still not getting it. Sania, for her part, she goes and she reads Naki's mind. And she says that their memories do not exactly line up. She says her memories of last night are very different, but not in a way that a misunderstanding would not explain. Despite what you recall sensing, she has not learned black magic. And I am assuming that Naki has access to a stone or something that can keep Sonia from getting into her head completely. I think that's like how she's pulling this off. She has assembled her pieces on her board and she knew how to play it. Because I don't know that Sania, I think that Lorcan mentioned that they have this technology, but I don't know that she would ever expect it to have made its way outside of that community. And, she says that her mother died. She could have come from the traders, or she could have come from somebody who, who knows? So, yeah, that was terrible, and I hated it. And Lilia just needs to fucking wake up. And I wonder if Sania has any suspicions. Because whether or not the other girl's memories match up, I feel like there's going to have to be some inconsistencies that she starts to notice. I don't know. We'll see. It's turning into a bit of a detective book. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you again, Ashleigh, so much for commissioning this. Yeah, I'm just very invested in this little thing. And I hope you guys are enjoying the coverage. And I will see you again soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.